All right, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Inshallah, today we're going to be continuing the tafsir that we had been doing yesterday. And yesterday we kind of went in lots of details. وَإِذَا عَلَّمْتُكَ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةَ وَالتَّوْرَاةَ وَالْإِنْجِيلَ. So we were talking about the ayah إِذْ قَالَ اللَّهُ يَا عِيسَى بْنَ مَرْيَمَ اذْكُرْ نِعْمَتِي عَلَيْكَ وَعَلَى وَالِدَتِكَ إِذْ أَيَّدتُكَ بِرُوحِ الْقُدُسِ تكلم الناس في المهد وكهلا. So we went in details about the ayah when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells Prophet Isa alayhi salam, اذكر نعمتي عليك, and remember the blessings that I had blessed you with. And we said, was that discourse directed at Prophet Isa alayhi salam, or was this directed at the followers? So that's, differences of opinions. إِذْ أَيَّتُكَ, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given him التأييد, basically the support, the empowerment, the miracles, literally it's the hand. But of course, this is not to say had given you the hand per se, but this is to be interpreted figuratively. بروح القدس. So what was he given? روح القدس, Jibril alayhi salam, or is it? Yesterday, the sister asked, well, what is kalimatullah, and why was Prophet Isa alayhi salam anointed with that particular word in the Quran and not another prophet as kalimatullah? So with research, Kalimatullah, because he was Kalimatullah because he was different than all other prophets, that he was created with kun fayakun. That's the kalima. Kun. Kalimatullah. So he was created by kun fayakun, and his birth was a miraculous birth. And also kun fayakun is one, but also that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically said تُكَلِّمُ النَّاسَ فِي الْمَهْدِ وَكَهْلًا. That's the kalima. تُكَلِّمُ النَّاسَ فِي الْمَهْدِ وَكَهْلًا. تُكَلِّمُ النَّاسَ, that's the kalima, that he was actually the one to speak in infancy. وَكَهْلًا, and even in older age. وَإِذْ عَلَّمْتُكَ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةَ وَالتَّوْرَاةَ وَالْإِنْجِيلَ. And we went in details. عَلَّمْتُكَ, taught you. Al-Kitab, is al-Kitab one? Is it inclusive to basically include any type of education, or perhaps include kitaba, writing, perhaps include different types of education that were probably famous at the time, made it possible for Prophet Isa alayhi salam to pick up at least the different, let's call it scholastic education at that time. And what does that look like? So is that this inclusive term right there, or the comprehensive term, or is it a specific wording to mean one, another book that was other than the Injil sent unto Prophet Isa alayhi salam, or was it two? Is it It-Tawrah, referring to It-Tawrah, or is it three, referring to It-Tawrah and Al-Injil? And therefore making this the specifying al-ahdiyya, are we talking about that? And making al-hikmah, is al-hikmah necessarily referring to al-Injil? Or is al-hikmah, which means wisdom, is the wisdom a specifying wisdom, or is it an inclusive wisdom? So if we say it's a specifying wisdom, that would basically speak about one, a type of sunnah, meaning a certain kind of an action, a certain legislation, a certain direction to help people identify what is right and what is wrong, basically differentiate between those. So that would be an inclusive al. If it's a specifying al, then we're speaking about perhaps maybe directed at an Injil, to containing not necessarily a revelation like the Quran per se, but containing the different teachings, the different the different wisdoms or preaching or different guidance that Prophet Isa alayhi salam was teaching his followers and the disciples. So is that the hikmah? So now we have several interpretations that, we basically went over yesterday, and we talked about some of what al-Fakhr al-Razi had said, even though I don't usually like to go to al-Fakhr al-Razi, but you really cannot skip al-Fakhr al-Razi. His inspirations within a tafsir are many times very interesting, sometimes definitely including a lot of the different sciences that were prevalent during his time, a lot of Greek influence, a lot of different philosophies that were probably prevalent during his time, etc. You could see are embedded in his tafsir. His tafsir is rather huge. We're talking about almost 21 volumes or so. So it's a huge tafsir, but a lot of times you could see that he will go into such interpretations, into tafsir for the Quran, but then embed a lot of philosophy, Greek philosophy, and perhaps even Indian, and a lot of Sufi interpretation, which really goes into, kind of like today and in our modern times, where there's taken from the Eastern religions, they'll talk about the negative energy and the positive energy, and and all of that is basically something that a lot of Muslims are right now taking in, thinking that, yes, this is how the universe functions. So just like that is common, where you could see Muslims embracing such rhetoric and embedding it within Islam, you would see a lot of perhaps those that are teaching even Islam, even the dua. You would see, yes, she's got, for example, qira'at, she's got perhaps Islamic studies and all of that, but then she will get a lot of those rhetorics from perhaps from those what they thought was a modern way of saying things, when in reality it's coming from those perhaps religions, or perhaps secular thoughts, like maybe maybe like feminism, or perhaps other groups, and then they would think that it's a modern way of saying things, and not really knowing that, no, it's not a modern way of saying things. This wording, this terminology actually carries uh, a certain basis, and traces back to a certain philosophy or a certain ideology, and so forth. So having that being said, I'm really particular, even though I did, I guess, yesterday, I did emphasize on some of, and uh, kind of, I guess, held on to what al-Fakhr al-Razi had mentioned yesterday, and just wanted to note, just to comment on that I don't necessarily take al-Fakhr al-Razi's tafsir, and that's the main reason why I don't usually take his tafsir, even though it's really something to benefit from. But you really have to be educated on Islam, in Tawheed and Aqidah, to know how to not cherry pick and be selective, and make sure that you've got a good foundation Lugha Arabiya, a good foundation in Aqidah, a good foundation in Islamic studies, in order to recognize which tafsir and how you're supposed to be taking and reading those tafsir, and not necessarily anything that's in the book of tafsir that we would necessarily take. So and what did remind us of what what al-Fakhr al-Razi had said? Al-Fakhr al-Razi had said that education was, or al-Kitab was the education that was prevalent during his time, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given him the privilege to learn that education in order to be prepared to receive the divine revelation. So it was teaching him, let's call it the empirical science, in order to receive the divine revelation or the divine knowledge. That's what he was saying. So it was empirical knowledge compared to, or um, in order to equip him with the knowledge to learn divine knowledge. That's what he was saying. Okay. Although it seems very interesting, but there's something to learn from that. Okay, let's continue. وَإِذْ تَخْلُقُ مِنَ الطِّينِ كَهَيْئَةِ الطَّيْرِ بِإِذْنِي. What is تخلق? تخلق actually means to create. So wait a minute. Was he actually creating? من الطين. What is الطين? الطين is basically mud and not necessarily clay, but it's by making mud and in the image of a bird, and then he would basically blow in it and it would turn into a bird. But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said bi-idhni. So both of these were bi-idhni. So there was a specific order, and is that the kalima? That's one interpretation. That was the kalima. That was the kalima, and that was the word that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given him. And that's why with those miracles, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given him these miracles to basically do by the order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it was a miraculous one creation. Well, it wasn't necessarily to create per se, but that's why the word was emphasizing كَهَيْئَةِ الطَّيْرِ, something that is something that seems or appears to be as a bird, but it wasn't a complete bird. It wasn't a complete bird. It was something similar to it, and he would basically be given the miracle to blow, and it becomes the bird. Okay. وَتُبْرِئُ الْأَكْمَهَ وَالْأَبْرَصَ بِإِذْنِي. تُبْرِئُ الْأَكْمَهِ. تُبْرِئ actually means to give cure. Okay. البر is basically to give cure, healing. Al-akmah. Is al-akmah the person that was born blind, or is that the person that is only capable of seeing during the day? So kind of like the albinos, they would be capable of seeing during the day, well, during the night, but not during the day. Okay. So is that something, or al-asha? In Arabic, they're called al-asha. Okay. Is that who this is referring to? Or is it referring to al-akmah, the person that has what we would call as legally blind? Okay, but they're not completely blind, but they're legally blind. They could still see, some probably shadows, but they can't really see everything. The image is not clear. So they could see shadows, they could see light things, but not fully capable of seeing things. Is that al-akmah? So differences of opinions on really what is al-akmah. At the end, he was curing the blind. He was curing the blind, but this cure wasn't a medical cure because he had learned the sciences back then. It was a miraculous cure. It was a miraculous healing. Okay, it was a miraculous healing. And of course, at the time, the tahaddi, or the challenge, was because the society at the time was advanced in medical studies. I mean, when we're speaking about advanced in medical studies, we can't compare them to today, okay? They were considered advanced at the time based on the time back then. The time back then, and how advanced compared to the societies that were equivalent to their time. They were talking about
Are you there?
Okay, sorry about that. Good thing, Noura, you reminded me. Good job. So tubri is basically to challenge them based on what they had known. So if you look at Prophet Musa alayhi salam, his challenge was to make something that is challenging their magic. Okay, challenging their magic. Prophet Isa alayhi salam, his challenge was to challenge their medical studies, or at least the sciences that they had at the time. Okay, so that's why, I mean, why wasn't he, for example, walking on water? Or why didn't he do something similar to Prophet Musa alayhi salam? Make something eat up all their food, or make something eat up all their magic, or whatever it is. They were not excelling in magic. They were excelling in education. They were excelling at the time, at least Prophet Isa alayhi salam's people, the society that he was living in, was actually excelling in education, excelling in, and remember, it was a civilization. I know that during the time of Fir'aun, there was a civilization, certainly, and the civilization that Prophet Isa alayhi salam was in was completely different than the civilization that Prophet Musa alayhi salam was in. Okay, so comparing the Roman civilization with the Pharaoh civilization be quite interesting to compare those two civilizations and what they were capable of doing. And I'm not an anthropologist or an archaeologist to compare the two civilizations, see which one and how each one advanced compared to the other, in order to understand how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had, and why he had given Prophet Musa alayhi salam a different miracle compared to Prophet Isa alayhi salam. And that's something that we can use in order to understand better, perhaps use maybe sociology, perhaps study archaeology, and really study what happened and how are they different, how are they similar, and why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala choose Prophet Isa alayhi salam for miracles that were different than the miracles that Prophet Musa alayhi salam was doing. Okay, and why was it? تبرئ الأكمه والأبرص. And why البرص? Why in particular البرص, or leprosy? So when we're speaking about leprosy, certainly it's affecting the skin. The skin is not feeling any pain, and then this person starts losing the sensation, losing nerve cells. Then they basically would not recognize what's harming their body. Then they start losing their limbs. Then they start losing their sight. They start losing their hearing, etc. All of that was really because they didn't even recognize they could be getting poked or getting poked probably by a nail, not recognize that and continue walking, and without them even not realizing that they're harming themselves badly. Put their arms in the oven and not even recognize that that you're going to lose your limbs this way. Anyhow, so where is this? And of course, if you basically look up, and so certain bacteria that is although it's kind of weird, التحرير والتنوير, who's that? It's الطاهر ibn Ashur. الطاهر ibn Ashur, you want to keep in mind science at the time, even though it wasn't long ago. He died in 1979, so that wasn't too long ago. But he was saying that it wasn't contagious. And when I looked up certain medical journals, they were saying that no, it can be contagious if that certain bacteria was passed on. And is it genetic? He said it wasn't genetic. But when I looked up modern studies, they
My
are saying
husband said that it's very contagious.
it's very contagious. Okay. So the journals were actually saying that it's not only contagious, but it could also be something that makes some people genetically, that they are more susceptible to getting it than others. But Of course, the sciences back then are completely different than the sciences today, but the society, when it comes to leprosy in particular, the society at the time was very fearful of leprosy because they didn't fully understand it. And certainly it is a disease that until now they don't necessarily have a cure for it. They do give, so you'll see a dermatologist, you'll see a neurologist, you'll see, different doctors to basically help you at least get to a certain level where you could survive and not basically degenerate, but not necessarily full cure. And of course, their fear of leprosy, because they were capable of recognizing that it's affecting more than what we're seeing. It's not only affecting the limbs, but it's also affecting the hearing, it's affecting the seeing, the sight, it's affecting the person in each and every single angle. So they were confused at what really was making this. Is it some kind of a curse that happened to the person? They didn't know anything about bacteria and none of that. So they were thinking that it was probably some kind of a jinn related, a spirit related that was affecting them. Now, one thing I believe in the Old Testament, I don't know if I'm right or not, was it in Leviticus, or it's one of the chapters in the Old Testament, there were a lot of recommendations on how you should stay away from people that have leprosy, how in order to basically not spread it, a certain very, very, let's call it very strict hygiene was taught within the Old Testament on how you can avoid spreading it and so forth. So very strict hygiene and very strict quarantine to make sure that you're not spreading it. So that's in the Old Testament. But here, Prophet Isa alayhi salam coming, of course, with new hikam, with new wisdoms, with new teachings, right there was teaching them something and showing them something that they did not have, basically in the Old Testament, which is how to treat it. So they were learning different ways to contain the disease, but not necessarily to treat the disease. So Prophet Isa alayhi salam comes with the miracle to fully treat the disease. And that was the miracle, to fully treat the disease in a society that had Bani Israel basically a complete scripture, basically just in regards, or at least a couple chapters, just to talk about leprosy, and a society that was boasting about medical studies. So here it is, Prophet Isa alayhi salam comes with the miracle to bring complete cure. Now, one thing I would say, looking at the tafsir in the past, and we're talking about old tafsir and their writings, their knowledge about leprosy or even different illnesses was definitely very primitive compared to today. So just like when we're talking about Tahir ibn Ashur, who was actually considered a modern scholar, but still had these mistakes where he said it wasn't contagious, when certainly it is, because it's a bacteria. And definitely he did, though, mention that it was something that is more found in areas that have hygiene problems and are not strict with the hygiene. So that one, he got that one right. But then the rest of the details didn't actually have it necessarily in place. And that's why it's important to include the different sciences, whether we're speaking about tafsir or whether we're speaking about understanding fiqh, etc., including other sciences, other fields to help us understand is important. And it's not necessarily to be separated. It's another, let's call it, lens to help us scrutinize these ayat or these ahadith or even the legal maxims and understand it better. Okay, so تبرئ الأكمه والأبرص. So that is تبرئ الأكمه and تبرئ الأبرص بإذني, by the order or by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وإذ تخرج الموتى بإذني. What is تخرج الموتى? تخرج الموتى. Why didn't it say تبعث الموتى? It didn't say تبعث الموتى. He said تخرج الموتى بإذني and not تبعث. البعث is resurrection. تخرج الموتى is basically to bring the dead back into life, but it's not the way that would be equivalent to al-ba'th or resurrection. So what was that looking like? The scholars of Tafsir actually went into lots of debates on what that really means and why tukhrij and not tab'ath. And to be honest, in the Tafsir, I couldn't actually find what really was, in Lugha Arabiya we say تشفي الغليل. تشفي الغليل, it's kind of like a very thirsty person looking for water, and just when they find water, they would, quench their thirst. I couldn't actually find something that was quenching my thirst for an answer in التفاسير. Why تخرج and not تبعث? I'll mention some of the things that they had said. They said تخرج الموتى was because, one, it was a dead person right there that was brought, and it wasn't something that already went through complete decompose. So the body wasn't completely decomposed. So that was تخرج and not تبعث. And some had actually said, well, al-ba'th is only during the akhirah when one had finally decomposed, and then you're bringing this person back to flesh, bones, or back to flesh, and complete the living into complete or back to complete life. So tukhrijul mauta, some scholars actually said he wasn't bringing it back to life completely, but it was very temporary, and it was something that was just for them to see, and it was basically going back to death right away. So it wasn't something that was taking long, but it was just for them to see the miracle, and that was the end of it, and not necessarily ba'th per se as resurrection, where everything is recreated the way that we are created right now. So that was some of those interpretations. وَإِذْ كَفَفْتُ بَنِي إِسْرَائِيلَ عَنْكَ. What is الكف? الكف is basically to prevent, to keep away. So كَفَفْتُ بَنِي إِسْرَائِيلَ عَنْكَ. I kept Bani Israel away from you. So away from you for what? Well, they were attempting to harm. They were attempting to harm Prophet Isa alayhi salam. They were attempting to assassinate him. And certainly Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had protected Prophet Isa alayhi salam from such attempts. Okay, from such attempts. And well, wait a minute. So what happened? What about the man that was crucified? That wasn't even Prophet Isa alayhi salam. According to the Muslims, according to the Quran, that was not Prophet Isa alayhi salam. وَمَا صَلَبُوهُ وَمَا قَتَلُوهُ وَمَا صَلَبُوهُ وَلَكِنْ شُبِّهَ لَهُمْ. They did not assassinate Prophet Isa alayhi salam. They did not crucify him, but they had confused him for someone else. So who was that someone else? Was that a disciple? Was that someone else? All of that, that's all of that would basically be something that, of course, not necessarily to prove who this person was, but it was an issue to at least know that, well, it wasn't Prophet Isa alayhi salam. At the end, it wasn't Prophet Isa alayhi salam. Was that story of him being in the tomb, then on the third day coming out, and was it the seventh day? Was it the third day? What about those two ladies that were passing by and all of that? That's basically all stories that the Quran did not whatsoever comment on, or the hadith. And certainly Prophet Isa alayhi salam was basically risen to the heavens. Okay, so that's one thing. وإذ كففت بني إسرائيل عنك إذ جئتهم بالبينات. So wait a minute. So what is the إذ right here? إذ جئتهم بالبينات. When you had come to them with البينات. What is البينات? البينات is a plural of بينة. What is بينة? Let me write that down, right? Let's write that down. البينة is one. That's plural. That's singular. So البينة is one. And the root is bayin or bana. Okay, so bana is for something that basically had become clear, and bayin is an adjective to mean that something is clear, and bayina is clarity. Is basically clarity. So جئتهم بالبينات, you had come to them with clarities. Is or are the clarities basically speaking about one second. So are the clarities necessarily the ilm that was basically given to him in the Torah and the Injil? Is that the clarity? Or is the clarity in clarifying Tawheed, in clarifying that he is a prophet? So when we're speaking about al-Bayyinat, one, it's a plural. Two, and since it's a plural, that actually can make it inclusive to include all. So al-Kitab, al-Hikmah, al-Tawrat, al-Injil, this can be within al-Bayyinat, where all of those, whether we're speaking about the argument or whether we're speaking about the clarity and what kind of legal maxims, what kind of legislature they were supposed to carry on, or whether we're speaking about divine revelation and what it was saying, or was it necessarily al-bayinat including the other evidences, bayinat, to make it clear to them that he was a prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? That would mean this al right here, that would make it an inclusive al, to include all of that, to include the argument, to include the clarity and understanding the truth and what they're supposed to be doing in legislature, and to include three, the divine revelation in both the Torah and the Injil, and can include four, the evidence, meaning the miracle, to prove that he's a prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that would be the inclusive al. If we're speaking about al-Bayyinat, sorry, that was the comprehensive al. If we're speaking about the specifying al bil-Bayyinat, then you would see the scholars debating whether al-Bayyinat would be speaking about al-Bayyinat, that he is a prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and not the son of God. So that was al-Bayyinah. It was the clarity that the message that he had come with is not to say that he is a son of God, but is a prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore, فَقَالَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا, the disbelievers had said, إِنْ هَذَا إِلَّا سِحْرٌ مُبِينٌ. They had basically said that this is obvious. The word mubin is obvious sorcery or magic or black magic. Why did they call it magic? Because they were capable of recognizing that there was something that is extraordinary, something that was supernatural. So, but the supernatural piece of it, they were capable of recognizing there was something supernatural in it, but they wanted to attribute that supernatural piece of it was coming from an evil origin, coming from an evil area. It was not divine. It was more of an influence from jinn, from evil creatures, etc. That's what makes a sihr. That's what makes magic. So therefore, all the things that he was capable of doing, they wanted to say that that was some sort of, yes, an evil supernatural influence that's making all of this happen. Okay, let's go back to Al-Qurtubi
and see what he says in regards to all of those. We talked about كففت. Here we go. This is where we left off at. So كففت, he says دفعت وصرفت, that he had basically kept away and basically protected. Let's see. And جئتهم بالبينات. القرطبي said الدلالات والمعجزات. الدلالات are basically the different signs. المعجزات are the different miracles. Okay, so here we go. البينات, he wanted to say they're basically the signs that he had come with, whether it's the argument or the different signs, or whether it is المعجزات, or the miracles that were basically forementioned before. So those would be البينات. Okay, so فقال الذين كفروا, why were they called كفروا? فقال الذين كفروا, here we go, this is it. فقال الذين كفروا, maybe I should highlight it so you can see it. فقال الذين كفروا, the disbelievers had basically said إن هذا إلا سحر مبين. And notice the word كفروا. كفروا actually comes from the root كفر. The word كفر can mean to deny. It could also mean to hide. Okay, so when you're looking at الذين كفروا, they basically did not believe in him and basically had rejected the prophethood for Prophet Isa عليه السلام. Okay, so when they said in هذا, so this pronoun right there, in هذا, that this is speaking about all the different things that he had come with, whether we're speaking about the different miracles that he had come with, or whether we're speaking about the different revelation that he was getting, that they had considered all of that. They wanted to say that هذا, all of that is nothing but complete sorcery or some kind of magic. Okay, let's see. Right here in هذا إلا سحر مبين, القرطبي wanted to say in other قراءات, and here he mentioned Hamza and al-Kisai, that he had read it as ساحر. So in another قراءة, in هذا إلا ساحر مبين, not سحر مبين, but ساحر مبين. So what's the difference? What's the difference between the two? So ساحر would be the person that does magic. سحر would be the actual magic itself. السحر would be the actual magic. الساحر would be the person. Okay, so in the end, the idea is pretty much around the same area, whether, yes, certainly, if they wanted to say that whatever he is doing is magic, that means he's accusing him of being a magician. Okay, so wait a minute. So did the Prophet ﷺ actually read this qira'ah in هذا إلا ساحر مبين? And is that basically Quran? The answer is yes. So can I read, yes, right here, we've got رواية حفص عن عاصم, at least in the copy that is shown in front of you, that's رواية حفص عن عاصم. Okay. So can I read al-Kisai? I'll read all of this رواية حفص, but when it comes to ساحر, I'll read سحر. Instead of reading سحر, I'll read it as ساحر. So if you're reading based on one قراءة, you want to continue with one قراءة. You don't want to include different قراءات within the same قراءة, unless you want to, kind of like what Abd al-Basit does. He would read, for example, والضحى, and he'll then read والضحى, and then he'll read it in different قراءات. You could do that if you wanted to basically identify or indicate that there are other qira'at, and you want to basically let the others also hear the other qira'at, whether it's Warsh, al-Kasai, Abu Ja'far, etc. Okay, so, but to read based on Hafs and then just in this one, read it different. So why can't I read at least that particular one in the other qira'ah? Because when you read in the other qira'ah, it would basically have a specific i'rab. It would basically have a specific place for the sentence. And if you were to read it based on another qira'ah, the i'rab, or at least the Arabic grammar of it, might actually fit fit wrongly if you were to embed it in the wrong qira'ah. Okay? So it's kind of like, how can I explain it? Okay, if I were to use, for example, had and have, okay, we would know that if I had such and such, but in order to have the word, for example, in a past participle, that's when you're going to use, for example, the have, or you're going to use a different structure. So you can't just take words and say, okay, I'll use this one differently. I'll basically embed something else here. Well, then you're going to come up with a result that your grammar is wrong. Okay, your grammar is going to be wrong. So you don't want to do that. Okay, let's continue. وإذ أوحيت إلى الحواريين أن آمنوا بي وبرسولي. And when I had, let's say, أوحيت, and let's look it over here. وإذ أوحيت إلى الحواريين, and when I had given الوحي. Wait a minute, so what is الوحي? الوحي is information. الوحي, is it fast information? What are we looking at? أوحيت إلى الحواريين. We're going to get to the word الوحي. The word الوحي and what it really means. Okay. أوحيت إلى الحواريين. الحواريين basically got what? وحي? They got a revelation. And what did they really get? What does it mean that they received a revelation? So they also were prophets, or what does that actually mean? I thought so who are al-Hawariyin? Al-Hawariyin are basically the disciples. Okay, so the disciples, those are al-Hawariyin. So is it true, like what many Christians would say, that al-Hawariyin were basically prophets? Is it true that they were prophets because they had received some kind of an inspiration to basically write? Is it the same kind of wahi? Well, look, the Quran is basically supporting that too. How do we understand it? Let's say, an aminu bi. We're going to get there. Okay, we're just laying out a number of different misconceptions and a number of different wordings, and we're going to explain it later on. Okay, an aminu bi wa bi rasuli. That they should, hold on, let me first erase this one so you could see the highlight for this one. An aminu bi. So what was awhaytu ila al-hawariyin, given the inspiration to the disciples, and semicolon right there, an aminu bi, that they are supposed to be believing in the Lord Almighty, wa bi rasuli, and in my prophet. So then they said, قالوا آمنا. So then they said, we believe and bear witness that we are Muslimun, that we are Muslim. Lots of details right there, right? Let's look at it. First of all, we have to understand what awhaytu means. What is al-wahy? And what does that look like? Okay, well, in order to understand the word al-wahy, it's important to first break it down. Al-wahy in Lugha Arabiya actually means to give al-ilham. Al-ilham is like an inspiration. But al-wahy is actually in different ways, okay? Because even in the Quran, al-wahy could mean a certain revelation that is sent through Jibreel alayhi salam to the prophets and the messengers. That's the first type of wahy. So the first type of wahy is basically through Jibreel alayhi salam as an inspiration through an angel. That's a direct one, okay? The second type of wahy, so let's put number 2 right there, is basically an inspiration to mean that it was basically giving them some instinct, something similar to the instinct. So, قذفت في قلوبهم, ألهمتهم. What does that look like? You know, when, for example, it happened to all of us, when you're probably sitting at home and something just tells you your baby woke up, and you just go upstairs or go to your room and discover that the baby had basically had been awake and that you were right. It was, was it a motherly instinct? Is it wahi? Yes, it's wahi. Is it Jibreel alayhi salam coming to you to tell you that your baby woke up? No. That's wahi that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given you. And similarly, what we would call as the sixth sense, remember the sixth sense? And they would talk about six senses that you felt, so you remembered Emily, and Emily calls you and all of that. Okay, so is that wahi? That's a type of wahi. It's a type of something that you would feel in your heart. Where is that coming from? What really inspired you to think about her? What inspired you, etc. All of that, all of those different things. Of course, inspirations are, yes, they are wahi, but we're not speaking about the inspiration to encourage you to do something, but we're actually speaking about an inspiration where you felt something all of a sudden come to you unexpectedly. You're sitting down, probably, listening to the class, all of a sudden you're thinking about, I don't know, you're thinking about somebody that, there was no reason to have this person come to your mind right now. It doesn't have to be something. It can be, hey, you were just listening. All of a sudden you were like, oh, the car keys. And you just go get the car keys right before it was about to get stolen. And second day, you read that there was a thief in the area that was going to steal something, but who actually gave you that inspiration to just all of a sudden remember the car keys? It was a type of wahi. Go ahead, Nina.
Yeah, I was just going to say, what about the dream?
Dream, dreams are really interesting because according to the hadith, they are actually part of the signs, and they are a type of wahi. Not all dreams, because some dreams are from shaitan, okay, from shaitan. And that's why when you would have a bad dream, the sunnah is to blow 3 times on your left and put your palms together and read قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ 3 times, قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ الْفَلَقِ 3 times, قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ النَّاسِ 3 times, and blow on your within your palms, what you basically, after reading all of that, and then wipe your body, or is it wipe your face with it, and just say أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. So that's one type of dream. The other type of dream is a dream that is a result perhaps of just different things, which is called أضغاث وأحلام. Just different things that you're probably afraid of something, traumatized from something. It basically comes to you often. Okay, such a trauma comes to you and then you start dreaming about it, etc. So that's a different أضغاث وأحلام. Or perhaps you're hoping of something and it comes to you, or certain changes in the body, just like wet dreams, for example, certain changes, hormonal things happening, and your body is basically, let's say, interacting and based on the different changes in your body. You could be sleeping on a pebble, and of course in your dream, you're dreaming that you were, I don't know, a mujahid, and some kafir just stabbed you with it. When you wake up, you're like, oh, it's just a rock. It was just a pebble someone put on my bed. Okay. And the other type is basically the dream that the Prophet ﷺ had said that it would come to the salihin. It would come to the salihin. There would be an interpretation. The dreams are basically, one, it can be warning you of something that is going to happen in the future. And it could be a dream clarifying something that you probably don't know that is happening during your time. And it could be a dream to basically bring guidance to you, or it could be a dream telling you of something that you need to know of, and all of those different details. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically help guide you to the right thing. Okay, so when we do dream interpretation, what is the dream interpretation based off of? The dream interpretation is based off of the different ayat and the different ahadith. So let's say we're speaking about Ishams wal Qamar. Okay, Ishams wal Qamar, according to Ishams wal Qamar, according to Surah Yusuf, that would really be the father and the mother. Okay, the father and the mother. If we're speaking about nujum, we're speaking about family. If we're talking about teeth, we're speaking about family as well. If we're speaking about clothes, we're speaking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had described husband and wife and marriage as garment. Therefore, that would actually talk about marriage or speak about perhaps a husband or wife, etc. Okay, so this isn't necessarily just that. So don't take my word and say, okay, every time I would dream of a garment, that means if I'm not married, I'm going to get a husband. That's not what we're saying. We're saying that, depending on the interpretation, depending on the person that had seen the dream, that would also be something that would be part of the interpretation. But we would go back to the Quran and Sunnah, and the Quran and Sunnah would tell me how and what is within the hadith and Quran, basically indicating a relationship between such things and basically the inspirations that the person might be getting in a dream. So
Jazakallah khair. Jazakallah khair.
it's quite interesting. You want to keep in mind that dream interpretation definitely is a ilm. Okay, it definitely is a ilm, and you do have books like al-Maqdisi. Muhammad ibn Sirin's book is actually not his. It was attributed to him, but it wasn't really his. So when it comes to dream interpretation, it's not like it's an empirical science where you could actually say, well, here it is, here's my evidence, and here's the details to prove such and such and all of that. But you want to just keep in mind that it's all within the area of theory, trying to put the pieces together, and not necessarily something that we could say is 100% evident and basically coming to a final answer right there. Okay, let's see. And this is very similar when we're speaking about, for example, instinct. We're speaking about an inspiration that's not necessarily divine inspiration. We're speaking about the ayah that is basically saying, وَأَوْحَى رَبُّكَ إِلَى النَّحْلِ. أَوْحَى رَبُّكَ إِلَى النَّحْلِ. Is it that the bees, what is a nahl? Nahl is a bee. Is it that the bee was getting Jibreel alayhi salam, giving the bee a revelation? And absolutely not. أوحى ربك إلى النحل basically had given certain instinct to the bees, and the bees would basically build their beehive in a certain way, basically based on not necessarily information, but based on inspiration. So the bees definitely were not doing some kind of studies in geometry. What's the best way? What's the best design to make our beehive in? And then finally deciding, well, it's not triangles, but it's basically the pentagon, or basically in that shape, and not for perhaps a square or whatever. All right, but it's basically based on a certain shape. Well, why that shape? Or why for example, the other day I was actually listening to this documentary that was saying, this expert in bees, he was actually saying that bees actually inform other bees about the place of pollen in certain areas. So they would basically do certain rapid movements in order to basically draw the map, and they would draw the map on certain, let's say, going lines and certain zigzags in order to let them know where the place of that pollen that he had basically found, and in order for other bees to know where to go in order to get more of that pollen. It's quite interesting. So are the bees necessarily learning some kind of science? The answer is no, it's some kind of wahi. This wahi is not only to bees, but the Quran emphasizes the bees as certainly for us to learn more about that, but it's not just that. But same thing if we're talking about armadillos, if we're probably talking about other kinds of birds and perhaps crows or perhaps maybe hummingbirds or whatever it is, that the instinct that they would get is a form of wahy. It's a form of an inspiration. The most important thing is really that term wahy that we're trying to get to is that it is going to be a specifying wahy if we're talking about an inspiration coming to a prophet, but it would be more comprehensive if we're talking about wahy that is basically going to perhaps bees. And let's see another type of wahy that is probably even more interesting. أوحينا إلى أم موسى. أوحينا إلى أم موسى. That Musa, who's Musa? Musa is basically Prophet Musa's mother. You want to remember that Musa alayhi salam did have an older brother, Harun, but Musa, that's in order for us to know who we're talking about in this situation. Okay, أوحينا إلى أم موسى. She was given an inspiration. Was it an inspiration where Jibril alayhi salam basically had come to her and given her this revelation, this inspiration? No. So what was she supposed to do? She was given the order to basically put Prophet Musa alayhi salam in the bassinet, throw him in the sea, and that somehow he was going to be saved. Did she actually know that he was going to be saved? No, she didn't. But she was given that inspiration that he was going to be saved and that he was going to be brought to her somehow. And that's when his sister, later on, of course, after this bassinet goes basically at the palace, the Pharaoh's palace, and the queen, basically the Pharaoh's wife, basically is given this bassinet, which basically landed at their shore and at their palace's shore. Then, of course, they're looking for a nanny to nurse Prophet Musa alayhi salam, but it wasn't until later his sister recognizes that, oh, this is my brother, but if I were to tell about him, well, he's basically falling on the times when baby boys are going to be killed. So if I were to disclose his Bani Israel ancestry, that was going to be the end of him. So I'll just stay quiet about it, runs to his mother and basically just recommends that, hey, I've got someone that could probably be a good match to nurse him. And of course, right there, Musa was inspired to stay silent about it and not disclose the figure, or at least the reality of who this child was. And that's another wahy that she got. So when we're speaking about these types of wahy, okay, أوحى بأن ربك أوحى لها. We're speaking about another type of wahy right there. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had بأن ربك أوحى لها, that your Lord Almighty had given that inspiration for what? We're speaking about earth. Are we talking about nature? Are we talking about just basically the different things that were right now already had been created, and right now that the Lord Almighty had basically given them the inspiration that, or the order? Is this the inspiration to mean order, to mean decree, that there is this decree that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had right now ordained, that this is now announcing as the final day, i.e. Day of Judgment. So بأن ربك أوحى لها is another example for that. Okay, now let's continue. Now we know that al-wahy could mean, let's look at this one, could mean a revelation, and could mean an inspiration, and could mean an instinct, an inspiration by instinct, and could also mean an inspiration that one might get during during a person basically awake or even during sleep, and could also mean an inspiration to mean an ordain, to ordain, or basically an ordeal, or an obligation, or basically an order. Okay, so just put that one within that. So another thing, let's look, this one's quite interesting. Because he said, وَإِذْ أَوْحَيْتُ إِلَى الْحَوَارِيِّينَ. Another interpretation, they basically said, well, since أَوْحَيْتُ could also mean to make an order, just like بِأَنَّ رَبَّكَ أَوْحَى لَهَا, they said here, أَوْحَيْتُ, it doesn't necessarily mean that the disciples were given an inspiration to mean some kind of an inspiration that is miraculous inspiration, but that they were actually ordered. They were ordered, they were basically obligated. So أوحيت إلى الحواريين, that they were given the order to do what? To basically, one, submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this actually is making a lot of sense within this context. Because when you say, وَإِذَا أَوْحَيْتُ إِلَى الْحَوَارِيِّينَ, semicolon right there, أَنْ آمِنُوا. So that would make a lot of sense. Because if it is, and I had ordered the disciples, semicolon, what was the order? That, here comes the imperative verb. أَنْ آمِنُوا, that they should believe in me, i.e. the Lord Almighty, وَبِرَسُولِي, and in my prophet. So now their response was, they said, قَالُوا آمَنَّا. Then they said, we had believed, and وَاشْهَدْ, and now bear witness that we are Muslim. So now we would see that أوحيت is not necessarily just to inspire, but they recognize that there was an inspiration, that they had an obligation to deliver the message, to basically also believe in Allah Almighty, believe in the Prophet, and certainly not whatsoever keep the message and keep the truth about Prophet Isa alayhi salam to themselves. وَاشْهَدْ بِأَنَّنَا مُسْلِمُونَ. And of course, وَاشْهَدْ بِأَنَّنَا مُسْلِمُونَ, or وَاشْهَدْ بِأَنَّنَا مُسْلِمُونَ. So what's a Muslim? I thought Muslim was after Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. No, because even Prophet, if you remember, Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, and you remember all the other prophets, all the other prophets were basically coming with the same message, which is, what is the ayah? What is the ayah right now? Who can remind me? What does it mean? What is the ayah? Forgot that right now, slipped my mind. Okay. إِلَّا رِجَالًا نُوحِي إِلَيْهِمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا أَنَا فَاعْبُدُونِ. To worship basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. So here, وَاشْهَدْ يَا رَبْ وَقِيلْ يَا عِيسَى بِأَنَّنَا مُسْلِمُونَ. So basically, وَاشْهَدْ بِأَنَّنَا مُسْلِمُونَ, is this talking about Prophet Isa alayhi salam to bear witness that they had become Muslim? Or is this وَاشْهَدْ meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Differences of opinions between scholars. So it is 131. إذ قال الحواريون يا عيسى ابن مريم هل يستطيع ربك أن ينزل علينا مائدة من السماء. Lots of details in regards to this ayah. So I'm going to stop right here, inshallah. And because you could see lots of details, and I don't want to stop that ayah in the middle of it. So we will basically continue tomorrow in the tafsir. إذ قال الحواريون يا عيسى ابن مريم, or مريم, because the ra is مفخمة, هل يستطيع ربك أن ينزل علينا مائدة من السماء. Any questions before we end? Okay, let me see. Is everybody with me here? Yes.
Yes, we are with you.
All
And-
right.
Yeah. So was TikTok.
Oh, okay. Well, alhamdulillah. Okay, good job, Noura. Good job. I'm proud of you. Okay, so what we'll do, inshallah, we'll stop right here. We'll continue tomorrow